what I also try to explain to people, and I think you probably understand this, is that this is an enormously fun business. And as somebody who looked at our business, was interested in our business, told me, the stuff we do has a high cost of failure. And that to me is interesting. As a cop I used to work with, I'd like to say what kept him going was that every day was a free ticket to a show. The most interesting and probably the most high profile case I handled was a terrible police corruption case against two New York City policemen who were falsely arresting Black and Hispanic guys, invariably Black and Hispanic men, and charging them with sexual abuse of invariably white women.
Hello and welcome to the Intelligence Advantage podcast, where we talk to the movers and shapers in the investigation and intelligence space. My name is Gary Miller. I've been an investigative lawyer for nearly half a century, and I'm also the chairman of the IFG, a network of international investigative and asset recovery lawyers. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by an icon in and shaper of the investigation industry, namely Dan Nardello. Dan has been involved in many of the leading investigations and asset recovery projects over the last 20 odd years. He is without doubt an icon in the world of investigations. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, and thank you for your kind words. Happy to be here.
I gave you a little hint when we spoke last time, Dan, that I would kick off with a question that I'm often asked when people reflect on my and their careers. Who has had the most powerful impact on your career and why?
That's actually a very easy question for me, and that person is Michael Mukasey, who I met in 1981 when I was a summer associate during law school at a firm called Patterson, Belknap, Webb and Tyler. Michael, who was a prosecutor like me out of the Southern District of New York, was my big buddy during, we were assigned to each other serendipitously during that summer. And I subsequently was made an offer at that firm, and I started there in 1983. And I worked primarily with Michael, who is a brilliant lawyer and not only taught me just about everything I do right as a lawyer, or did right when I was a lawyer, but also encouraged me to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District, where he had hailed from. And we've been friends now for over 40 years, and he has had, without a doubt, the biggest impact on my career, and has had, I don't know if you know him, but he's had a stellar career of his own.
Tell me more. What does he do?
Well, he shortly after I left in 1987 to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, he had been appointed a federal judge, became the chief judge in the Southern District of New York, and then was Attorney General of the United States under George Bush. Went back and became a partner at Debevoise, where he is now of counsel. But a great friend, a brilliant lawyer, who taught me, among other things, that often less is more, which is an important lesson to learn. And a brilliant writer. Michael is one of the best, certainly legal writers and writers in general that I have ever met. And I learned a lot by him editing my work.
And how long were you in private practice before you made the jump?
I was just there for 4 years. So I started full-time in 1983, and I left in 1987. And
were you, by any chance, doing white-collar defense work, or were you doing something completely different?
No. I did a lot of things. I did some civil litigation, but primarily my work with Michael and Harold Tyler, who's one of the named partners of the firm. He had also been a federal judge and a high-ranking official at DOJ. But I worked with them on white-collar criminal defense cases, lots of libel and defamation cases, because at the time, that law firm represented what were the two biggest circulation dailies in the United States, the New York Daily News and Wall Street Journal. This is back in 1983, and worked on representing lawyers in disciplinary proceedings including one of my first cases as a young associate was the disciplinary proceeding against Roy Cohn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I remember that name probably only because I went to see the film about
The Apprentice. Yeah, it's a
The
great film.
Apprentice.
It's a great movie.
And I must admit, you come away, or I came away from that film feeling almost a bit dirty, having engaged in what Cohn was up to and the way that he was a lawyer, and he was the one that allegedly, I don't know whether this legend is true, but allegedly taught Mr. T everything he knows.
Well, that's certainly the premise of the film, and that's been reported widely. Yes, he was a lawyer. He sadly was a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, and was famous, among other things, for trying Ethel and Julius Rosenberg in the
Wow.
famous Russian espionage case. Yeah. And he was a major power broker in New York City.
He was. And
Um,
how, very briefly, how did you, what case was it that you were working on for him, or you were defending a case brought by him?
Yeah, by the New York Bar Disciplinary Committee.
Right.
He was ultimately disbarred for a variety of reasons, and it was towards the end of his life because if you recall in the film, he became very sick. He didn't disclose it to anyone, but he died of AIDS.
Of AIDS, that's right.
Yeah.
So coming back to the work you did while you were in private practice and Michael's influence on you, it was because of his teachings. Could you point to one thing, one lesson? You've mentioned less is more, but one lesson or one area that Michael helped you with that really you stepped back and you thought, this is going to stand me in good stead for the rest of my career?
Yeah, I mean, just overall, it was being able to watch up close. And the practice of law was very different then. First of all, we were in the office, not 5, but 7 days a week, and for the most part. And the way you learned was by, sitting at a table with a senior lawyer who was reviewing your work and going over it. When I say less is more, which sticks with me, is that a lot of legal writing, at least, tends to be can be obtuse and just overdone. And I think that's where Michael, many ways a brilliant guy, but he was a brilliant writer. And so his editing of my work and forcing me to make my arguments in a succinct, powerful, and sort of straightforward way I think, stood me in good stead.
And what was it at private or in private practice that made you feel, you mentioned Michael encouraged you to, were you otherwise not inclined to become a prosecutor? Was it something that hadn't previously hit your consciousness?
Right. I didn't really think about it. I didn't know quite what I wanted to do when I got out of law school, other than I knew, because of course I took in law school, that at some point I wanted to try cases. And so working with Michael and other people at that firm, several of whom were alumni of the Southern District, I learned what that was about, and then that became a real ambition for me. And fortunately, I was able to get in.
And I've got to ask, what was the most interesting or the most serious case, perhaps the most high profile as well, that you handled while a prosecutor?
The most interesting and probably the most high profile case I handled was a terrible police corruption case against two New York City policemen who were, at the time, there was a separate division called the Transit Police who worked on the trains and buses. Now the departments have merged, but this was a case of two New York City transit police officers in a sort of an elite undercover unit who were falsely arresting Black and Hispanic guys invariably Black and Hispanic men and charging them with sexual abuse of invariably white women. And it was, I think, the first civil rights prosecution that the U.S. Attorney's Office, at least in the Southern District, had done in many, many, many years. And it was compelling. It was a difficult case. It was a hard-fought case. The investigation was difficult. It was widely covered in the press. It was difficult also because, the police union flooded the courtroom with supporters, and I was harassed. And
were you threatened?
yeah, I was, and it's strange because I prosecuted mafia guys after that, and I was actually before that, and I was never threatened. But yeah, so I couldn't. They didn't want me to take the subways to work during the pendency of the trial. So an investigator from the U.S. Attorney's Office picked me up and took me to work every day. It was a little crazy, but it was an important case because
and what was the financial, or was it not a financial motive? Was it a racial motive at the time?
It wasn't. No, it wasn't a racial motive, in the sense that, or a financial motive. What was happening in some, I don't want to bore you with all the details, but what was happening is they were making arrests early in their shift, and then essentially getting off the rest of the day to process the person they arrested. So it was a way of just getting out of the subways early. And so you'd see these arrests were invariably at the beginning of the shift. And what was happening, and the way it came to our attention, is the purported victims, when they were interviewed by the DA's office, they said, "Look, nothing happened to me." And yet the officers filled out reports describing the victim statements about how this guy was, rubbing his penis up against them. That was invariably the charge. And it was a heartbreaking case because, these were truly innocent people.
I've been involved in a few, but as you probably know, I've never been on the prosecutorial side. But motive is always an elusive thing when it comes to understanding what leads or generates human behavior. I have to say, it's the first time I've ever heard of that kind of insidious behavior and criminality in order to get off early. I've heard it for bonuses. I've heard it because they're being paid by somebody who wants to get Hispanics or whatever out of their area. But that is seriously a unique motive.
Yeah,
just for the hell of it.
And a terrible abuse of the criminal justice system.
And I'm going to come back to that, I hope, if we have enough time, because I've got loads of lovely questions for you. But this whole concept of the rule of law collapsing or being corrupted has such significant impact on individuals on a granular basis and society. And I don't know about you, and I'm probably pre-asking the question I want to ask later, is I can see some very uncomfortable signs that the rule of law is weakening, particularly in the US. But I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because what I do want to ask about is the human being Dan. Is the Dan at work a very different persona to the Dan at home? Are you Mr. Calm and cool in the office, but really fiery Italiano macho man at home?
I'm certainly not macho man. I'm definitely Italiano. That's an interesting question. I've never thought about it. Look, I'm the same Dan. I'm less businesslike at home, I hope, and more businesslike in the office. But I think people who know me well would recognize me both in my official capacity and in my personal capacity.
Okay, so I'm
I'm not
gonna.
a wildly different person, and no one would describe me as, calm and cool.
I
Um,
see. Okay, so I'm gonna tread carefully, but a little bit further, and say, how do you think your family, pick whichever member you want, would describe you when someone says, "Oh, tell me, what's Dan like as a ex?"
I would hope, I think, that my wife and daughter would describe me as loving and funny,
Loving
because
and funny.
those are the things I at least aspire to.
So humor
um,
humor is an important part of your persona, your makeup, and clearly the way you behave.
yeah, I think that uh, you know I think that's right. I think that's right.
Okay. So now I'm going
Hopefully,
to ask you the
hopefully
same.
other people find me humorous, and I'm just not humoring myself. So
Well, you never know in life. You at least, as Winston said, if you're 51% ahead of the game, then okay, you're doing all right. So, and look at if you would at work at people that work with you the closest. For me, it's my PA. My PA probably knows me well, not as well as my wife, but certainly very well because sees the slightly less cuddly side, if I may use that phrase. So, how would she describe you if someone said, "What's it like to work for Dan?"
well, as it happens, my PA is relatively new.
Right.
I'm not sure she has the basic
Experience.
experience yet, but I did have one PA who retired just before COVID for about 13 years, and I think she would probably describe me as demanding, sometimes impossible, but fair and funny. Um, I had a very good relationship, and I have a very good relationship with my current PA, but she hasn't seen all sides of me yet.
Still time to come, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, outside of work, you and I met in New York, and you've also told me a little bit about last time some of the charities. But when you're not at work, what are you passionate about? When you're not thinking about work, what's your real passion?
I love music. I particularly like jazz and American songbook, but I love all sorts of music. I love going to the theater. We have subscriptions to just about every theater company there is in New York City. I love going to the movies. I love to read. I'm in the process now of rereading Proust in Search of Lost Time, which I read for the first time during COVID with a wonderful professor who's also a well-respected published author by the name of Andre Aciman. He wrote uh,
Okay.
he wrote a book which the film Call Me by Your Name is based on, and he's a Proust scholar. And I love to spend time with my friends and family. We travel. And I love the city I live in.
The only,
In addition to loving London, where I lived for seven
but
years.
you know what the thing that is missing that I expected you to say, number one or number two, got to be food. You ask a Jewish boy like me, what is my passion? And my passion is good food, of course, good company. But being Italian, food must be in there somewhere, Dan. Come on.
Well, it clearly is if you just take a look at me. But yes, I do. I love good. I love good food, and
Are you a chef of
I
any
am not.
quality?
I am not a chef at all, and which kind of makes me sad. I started my business, or I started in this field after I left the U.S. Attorney's Office in Rome, and should have learned to cook there, but instead I ate and didn't do much cooking.
So you, if I'm not mistaken, you started Nardello Co in London, which is slightly unusual for a New Yorker and somebody that had spent their formative years, certainly up to Rome, I believe, in the US. How did London become the launch pad for Nardello Co?
Well, because I was living and working there, and I joined a company in when I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, an investigative a company firm called Decision Strategies. I started their first office in Europe in Rome, Italy, which was a crazy idea.
Did it by any chance have anything to do with romance that you decided to do that
Yes,
in
I was
Italy?
in love. I was in love with an Italian psychoanalyst who became my second, or as I like to say, my penultimate wife. And that's what attracted me to Rome. I had always I when I was a prosecutor, I worked some with Italian magistrates and spent some time in Rome on business, and I had studied there when I was in college. In any event, I became a partner in that firm more sensibly. I then opened up an office for that firm in London.
And that's how I remember meeting you. In fact, I remember meeting you in Cambridge at the symposium, and
Yeah, yeah,
you were
yeah. That's
with your partner.
I don't remember who was with me, but I do remember going to the Cambridge Symposium. So any event, I was living and working in London.
Yeah.
Uh, we had 2001, I think, sold the company, and I was a minority shareholder, but I did well on the deal
Who did you sell to, by the way?
to an outfit, a publicly traded company called SPX.
Okay.
And SPX, I don't follow them anymore, but they did make all sorts of components for cars. And for some reason, the chairman of the firm, or the CEO, I think, not the chairman, the CEO, took a liking to one of my colleagues at Decision Strategies and thought it would be fun to have an investigative business. I think they were better at parts and machinery than they were at people, because the one of the initial conversations I had with the CFO, and I'll never forget this, he told me, to us, cost walk on two legs. And to which I replied, no, 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 our assets walk on two legs and they walk out the door every night. They didn't really understand how to run a professional services business, where your assets are your people. Of course, they're costs, but they're also the biggest asset.
And was DSL a forerunner in the industry generally, or was it one of many investigative agencies that you could have linked up with? You just happened to find that particular company, or was it? It wasn't Mint at that stage, was it?
No, 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 it wasn't. It was called Decision Strategies, and it was founded by two former SDNY prosecutors, and that's how I introduced them. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had never planned to have a career in the investigative business. And in fact, when I was a prosecutor, I always enjoyed the trying of the cases more than the investigations, and arguing appeals. But love changed the trajectory of my professional life, happily so, because I've had a blast.
You have indeed. And DSL did very much what you do now, or just on a shrunk, on a more limited basis, or did they do something exotic?
No, no, they did. They did. Many of the same things that we do now. That this was before cyber. We now have a substantial cybersecurity and digital investigations practice. We also recently took on in London and in the States, forensic accountants. So we're doing forensic accounting work. But the core business of investigations is what decision strategies did.
And the forensic part is slightly later in the day than many of your competitors, or you've already always had some and you've just decided to expand it?
No, it's we've always done some forensic accounting work, and we typically work with outside consultants.
Right.
We realized we were leaving money on the table and that our clients told us that, look, if you have forensic accountants, we'll hire you. And we listen very closely to our clients. And the practice is not even a year old, but it's off to a great start with
Great.
terrific people.
And in terms of business and how it comes in the door and where it comes from, I know from my engagements with you and all sorts of companies that the two most common sources of business for an investigator would be lawyers and clients direct.
Right.
And you've worked in Italy, you've worked in London. Is that mix particularly different, do you think, in, for example, New York than it is in London? Is there more business coming from lawyers in the States than necessarily it happens in the UK, or what?
Well, I can only speak to our experience there,
Yeah.
and the answer is yes, there is more business that comes in through law firms in the States, and much of that is dispute work. And that is because we are the most disputatious and litigious country, around. And so there's a lot more of that work. And so we get instructions from law firms. It doesn't hurt that I'm a lawyer myself and a former prosecutor. And we now have, including me, 6 or 7 former prosecutors, four of us from the Southern District of New York. And so, yeah, I think because of who our network, or at least network when we left the U.S. Attorney's Office is and it's grown, but also because the U.S. is a litigious place, and in the States we do an enormous amount of white collar criminal defense work, supporting defense counsel in significant white collar cases.
And would you say that that is different also from the UK as well? That in the
Oh,
UK,
we do some of it in the UK, but I think it's totally different, and there are sort of structural reasons for that. Number one, most of our white collar criminal defense work is federal cases. Many of them in my old office, and the conviction rate, and I haven't looked at it lately, but in those cases is around 98 to 99%. In the UK, that just ain't the case. I haven't looked recently, but it is much, much lower. That's one. Two, a lot of what we do in criminal defense work in the US is helping to take apart the government's case. And a big part of that is demolishing, deconstructing the government's witnesses. And typically cooperating witnesses, but sometimes fact witnesses and experts. And with cooperating witnesses in the United States, they have a contractual relationship with the prosecution, and therefore in which they're required to disclose all previous bad acts, not just the crime that they're pleading guilty or that they were accused of. And so that relationship um, uh, it provides the opportunity to impeach on collateral issues, and challenge credibility on collateral issues. The relationship with witnesses between the Crown Prosecution Service and the Serious Fraud Office is different. And I haven't come up with this on my own, by the way. I've discussed it with I know a lot of white collar lawyers in London. So if you have the resources in the U.S., and many of the defendants in these cases are either indemnified or ultra high net worth individuals, you're going to want to hire folks like us to help you defeat the government, because every federal case brought is really for the defense. You need a Hail Mary pass. That's not the same in the UK.
Hail Mary pass for those of us not educated in.
Sorry, it just means you're going to throw everything at it. It's
I
like
see.
it's the last best chance of having something work.
Right.
Sorry, it's a football term, and I'm not even a football fan, but American football term. So because of difference in jurisprudence, difference in success rates, a lot of
Massive difference in both the quantity, the nature, and the quality of the government prosecution services. I mean, we don't have an effective SEC. I don't know what you would call our DOJ is the crown or whatever, but you've got so many different bodies in the US whose job it is or was, I say rather cheekily prior to this current administration, to investigate and, where appropriate, prosecute. The UK, it seems to all be, and I am probably the least qualified to talk about it, but I do know that it is long, it is painful, and equally important, it is not staffed with the bright young things that the prosecutorial departments and the US attorney departments are in the States. It's a badge of honor for an American lawyer to say, I've been with the Southern District or whatever it is. It doesn't exist in the UK.
No, I think that's right. You're absolutely right. And so, for instance, alumni from my office will, populate, the all the great, U.S. law firms, and then often they will go back into government service. So there's this give and take between, starting your career in a federal prosecutor's office, and the Southern District of New York is a great example of it. It's where people go young in their career, fire in their belly, wearing the white hat, and it's a very prestigious position. And it's also, for most people, it is a pathway to become a partner, at a significant law firm, and culturally that sort of scenario doesn't really apply in the UK, or really anywhere else that I've worked in Europe. And then on the continent, if you choose a path as a prosecutor, that's your career path, and you'll at some point become a judge. But private practice is one lane, and public service, or working as a judge or a magistrate is another. And they don't. Yeah, so there are cultural reasons for why we do more white collar work in the U.S. and less in Europe.
And
Cultural.
the other interesting observation or experience that I have seen over the last, being back in the UK, but I've always practiced in an English common law jurisdiction, is that strangely enough, in the civil field, the weapons available for lawyers are much greater and much more powerful than they are in the States. So if you're going to build a litigation business in the UK, you're much more likely to be successful financially. And I'm not saying that's the only definition, but more successful and likely to be able to build a bigger practice and sustain a bigger practice if you are in the commercial litigation field. And I don't see the same necessarily in the US. And I'm constantly, I don't know whether you have over the years, constantly surprised by the lack of familiarity of large firm lawyers with respect to international asset recovery techniques and strategies. They don't really, I don't know where it comes in the training in the US legal system, but of course the ones that are well experienced, they know the ropes in injunctions across the world and trust work and the way in which the English legal system has this wonderful system of inferences, which I guess also exists in the States. But there is not as much awareness in the US that I found. I don't know whether you find a difference in legal nous about international asset recovery, which is a big part of your business.
I think that's right. And I don't know the reason for that. There's certainly lawyers, skilled lawyers who, and I've worked with them in the States who do asset recovery work. And we probably have more of that work out of London. Um, and it also comes up, at least for us, more in the context of international arbitration cases, and some civil fraud cases as well. And I think I'm blanking now on what you call the successor to what used to be called the what a Moravia injunction. I know it was renamed.
It was. It's now called a good old asset freezer.
Yeah, but that's a particular aspect of English law that I think makes the kind of work that you do um, uh, that much more UK centered, if you like.
And it always blows me away. And then I shall come off my high horse as promoting and the guardian of and the promoter of everything English injunctive wise. But it always blows me away when I speak to American lawyers and I say, yes, when you get a freezing or asset freezing order, you get this order that compels them to disclose their worldwide assets. And they're like, this is like beyond comprehension for most lawyers in every other jurisdiction, but particularly the States. It's breach of some form or every single aspect of your constitution, right?
Well, there are asset forfeiture provisions under criminal law
Yes,
in the U.S., but I think you're right. It's a different, it's an aspect that is unique to English
to English law. So let's come back to or look at the difference between being a lawyer. You were a civil lawyer. You were a lawyer that did criminal and civil work. You then become a prosecutor. You then decide to hang your hat on the investigation related business. Does that mean you have to give up your practicing, what I would call my practicing certificate as a lawyer, or do you still practice law or the ability to practice law?
No, I have the ability to practice law because I keep my law license fresh. I
Right,
the what is called the CLE in the U.S. continuing legal education, and you're required under New York to do a certain amount of that every year.
right.
But I don't practice law. The firm doesn't practice law. We find facts. We're investigators, and it's the same for all of the lawyers and former prosecutors who work at my firm. And yeah, I mean that's the way it's structured. But
And have you
theoretically, I could go out and practice law because I still have a valid law license. But
there are a
that's not.
couple of things that interest me about that because there are more and more lawyers now that I can think of who have moved into the investigation space, but certainly originally, whereas in the US it was almost all ex-prosecutors, etc., that populated the investigation space, whereas in the UK it was very few lawyers went into it, but now more and more previously or qualified lawyers go into it. What is the difference in your mind, if any, of the ethical and the professional standards that would apply to somebody who becomes an investigator and those which you would have to apply if you were just practicing law?
Well, I can talk about the U.S.
Yeah,
More hopefully more fluently. So, in the U.S., lawyers are bound by ethical codes and codes of professional responsibility. Investigators, there is no investigative code of ethics. There is a minimalistic licensing requirement, controlled separately by each of the 50 states. But that is nothing that doesn't impose a series of ethical obligations on investigators. And as you well know, there are been, well documented stories of hijinks by investigators of folks, uh, doing things as blatantly illegal as hacking into phones and hacking into computers and, pretexting and obtaining information that they legally can't have. We, in part, because many of us are lawyers, in other part because we work for lawyers so much. So we adopt in our work the ethical rules that apply to lawyers. And in fact, when you're instructed by a lawyer in the U.S., those ethical obligations, derivatively apply to the actions of investigators. And I teach a course for CLE credit called Legal and Ethical Issues in Hiring Private Investigators, and I teach this for the law firms. And one of the first rules you have to understand is that the actions of the investigator are imputed to the lawyers. So if your investigator goes out and hacks into somebody's computer and you knew or should have known, or worse yet, you gave the instruction to, you're ethically liable for that breach. And you can't sort of consciously avoid sort of turn your back and say, well, I didn't know what he was doing. The point is you're required to supervise the investigator, and you can't turn a blind eye to illegal conduct.
Got it.
Sorry.
And is there, I know in the UK there has been a movement for many years to try and consolidate an investigation. There's the ABI, there's various different bodies that try and create their own code of conduct. And we have a piece of legislation that I still think, but maybe I'm showing my ignorance, needs further secondary legislation for it to work, to regulate every private or every commercial investigator. Has that movement also taken place in the States?
No, the investigative firms, to the extent that they are regulated, are regulated by the individual states. So, for instance,
I see. So you don't really need it in terms of an association with its own rules.
well, I didn't say that. I think there should be ethical rules that apply to investigators.
Okay.
But the point is, there is no regulatory body that, set up now that would enforce those rules. In 46 of the 50 states, including New York and California, where we have offices, you have to have a license
Right.
in order to hold yourself out as an investigator. But beyond that, there is not much regulation, and there is no sort of body that polices the work of investigators in any meaningful way.
And to get that license, you just need to have a pulse, or am I being a bit cheeky?
Well, you're being a bit accurate because you have to take a test. It varies from state to state, but it is not.
Not demanding.
It is not particularly demanding. It's nothing like the New York or the California bar exam. Let's put it that way.
Interesting. And that doesn't surprise me. And I'm not sure what the benefit is to it might well be, dare I say, a financial issue that the state likes to collect income from the renewal of licenses, because it does.
Yeah, that's always part of it. But, who knows?
Who knows?
But it is, that's the way it's set up. And
That's the
yes,
way.
it produces some revenue.
And I don't know, I did look at this. Do you have a feeling of how many investigators there are in the US? Is it like hundreds of thousands?
Well, that's a very interesting issue. I maybe if you count, small shops with one or two
Private
people,
eyes, yeah.
I don't know if it's hundreds of thousands, but maybe tens of thousands. Yeah, I would put it more at tens of thousands. But I have not done a study, which one could easily do, frankly, or get some sense if you went to every state and tallied up the people who have investigated licenses.
But of course, like with most of these things, if you set up an investigation outlet, would you be the only person that needed to be regulated? And if you employ 10 other people, not every single person would have to be licensed? Or
It's been so. One of my partners handles our compliance with the licensing requirements.
Right.
I have an individual license. The firm has a
You're kosher.
license.
In other words, you're kosher, Dan, so we know.
No, but everybody who works at the firm is either working under the firm's license or their own individual license.
License. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's come on to the meaty stuff in terms of the kind of cases. You were kind enough to send me a very interesting and impressive list of things that are in the public domain. Out of that list, I guess certainly the most recent is the very interesting defamation suit that the Macrons are bringing against this podcaster, Candace Owens from Delaware. And I mean, is that something that is, I wouldn't say unusual, but that's a really wonderful high profile case for you to be engaged in? Did that come from law, without digging and asking an appropriate question? Did that come from a lawyer, or was it as a result of the wonderful connections and relationships that you have in certain parts of government in France, in Europe generally?
No, it came from a discussion between one of the Macron's French lawyers, who is a client and knows our work, and their U.S. counsel, Tom Clare and Libby Locke at Clare Locke.
Right.
Tom is the go-to lawyer, and Clare Locke is the go-to firm for this sort of
For
work.
this kind of work.
And they were apparently discussing the case, and they said they need an investigator, and they both recommended our firm to each other. So that's how it came in from existing lawyer clients.
I mean, wonderful case. The more outlandish and bizarre the allegations are in cases that you and I work on, the more high profile they become for all the obvious reasons. Is there anything particular that you've done and I know it's ongoing and I know there's sensitivity, and if you can't say anything more, we shall move on. But was there anything in the way in which you were able to, at least at first blush, contradict some of the allegations she made were that the president's wife was not actually a woman. She was in fact a man. I mean, I don't know where you go with that. Do you get DNA records or birth certificates or what?
I don't want to comment too much. It's litigation. Suffice it to say that most of the claims, and certainly the defamatory ones, have no factual support. And I think
they're way out there.
Yeah, and if you read the complaint, and we work with Tom and his colleagues at Clare Locke. It just absolutely demonstrates the defamatory nature of the statements, and B, the fact that they have no basis in fact.
Had you heard of this so-called podcaster ever before that? Is it her sort of 10 minutes of fame?
I had not, but apparently she's very well known and has millions of
followers.
Yeah, but I had never heard of her. No.
And that leads me, I want to come back to some of the other cases, in particular the Purdue Pharma case, which is particularly interesting to me because I actually saw a Netflix or something about it. But I wanted to just take this theme of weaponizing intelligence, which is, this case is a particular example, although to be honest, it's weaponizing just lack of intelligence in very many ways. But it's not as if they were like a WikiLeaks and they got possession of information that they shouldn't have, and then they've embarked upon a campaign of vilification. The whole of the intelligence industry is now at least very much more aware of than it was when you and I started, of this weaponizing of data and intelligence and using it to influence the outcome of elections, to use it to intimidate people. What's going on, do you think, in the way in which people are thinking about gathering and using intelligence, Dan? What's changing?
I think people are living through social media. And so, lonely voices that, lonely, crazy voices that were not necessarily heard. They may have been out there screaming, but they're not necessarily heard, now find community online. And so if you connect people with bizarre theories or, views of the world, and they can connect more easily and aggregate more easily online, I think that's one bit of it. The terrible political polarization that certainly is you see in the US, but you see it all over the world,
Yeah.
frankly. There are examples in every Western democracy. So I think those are the big motivating forces. And so, bad people, poorly intentioned people, can more easily take advantage, and there's increasing sophistication on how to use and manipulate, and exploit social media for nefarious, and just generally nasty reasons. Um,
And
and we do a lot. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
we do a lot of work in that area. We had a case in London, which my colleagues Alan Kennedy and Finn Dugan handled. That was an incredible case. There was, and I had nothing to do with it. But there was a something called Tattle Life. It was sort of, as I understand it, like a Gawker website, that uh, where people could post horrible things about other people, and our clients, we were engaged by lawyers, but our clients were a couple of folks from Northern Ireland who are entrepreneurs, and for reasons that I don't understand, frankly, were maligned and defamed by this website. And people have been looking for years to find out who was behind it. And Alan and Finn were able to do it, and it resulted in the largest defamation verdict in the history of Northern Ireland, which is £400,000, which to me is interesting because there would be a small verdict in the U.S., which is a much harder jurisdiction to prevail in libel, as you well know.
yeah,
But in the Dominion case that Tom Clare brought, against Fox News, the award there was close to $800 million
that was on behalf of.
of Dominion, against Fox.
Were you involved in that at all or not?
No, no, I was not involved in that
No,
case.
no. I mean Nardello's, but I don't think the firm was involved either. So in the Tattle Life case, either because of that and or in any event, do you feel that the dangers posed by the anonymity of very, very often the internet itself and social media accounts, that we've, as a society, certainly as the more developed societies, we've lost the plot here in terms of not creating sufficient protections for people to be able to identify who are behind various accounts?
I'm not sure if we lost the plot, but it's an issue. I'm not so sure that I'm competent to opine on this. Regulation of the internet and of social media. But I think most people would agree that some is called for. I don't operate on social media. I don't have Facebook. I have a LinkedIn account, which I have never used.
So if
And
someone messages you on LinkedIn, they could be waiting for a reply for many years, right?
Well, not years, but it's not something I spend a lot of time on. I exist mostly in an analog world. But yes, I do think some regulation is needed.
And I can't help when you and I talk about social media, anonymity, it leads neatly into crypto. And in particular, I see right at the top of the list you gave me was a case that I followed also with interest, the FTX collapse. And the difficulty that you and I have when we're acting for victims of tracking down who actually owns what, where it is, in which wallet, etc. So tell me, if you can, a little bit about FTX and how you were able to maybe do things that people didn't think were possible.
It was a very significant matter for us. We were brought in, I think, the day after John Ray, who became the new CEO of FTX and was charged with cleaning it up and dealing with um, the wreckage, essentially. And when we worked very closely with John's lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell and some other matters with Quinn Emanuel. Um, in terms of, we had an incredible team led by my partners, Howard Master and Nick Beck. Um, and we looked all over the world for assets, and some of that involved people. I'm a Luddite, as I think I said, but we have a whole team that understands the crypto world and crypto investigations. And so we were able to use that expertise and employ it in this case. But we did, all sorts of traditional investigative work as well, and hunting for people's assets through research. We also helped the company as they sold off assets to make sure that they weren't selling it to the bad guys. And yeah, it was a uh, great and really interesting and important case for us. It really started us thinking about bankruptcy work in general. And we're doing much more of that. But we are currently doing a lot of investigations related to bankruptcy.
Right.
It also crystallized our decision to bring in forensic accountants, with whom we worked during the course of the FTX work. We worked with wonderful lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell and at Quinn, and working with John Ray, who was really an expert and extremely well known and respected in the bankruptcy case. It was a great case in that sense.
What was either the key? Was the fraud nothing more than the classic Ponzi, Bernie Madoff? You are going to buy X number of coins, and either they didn't exist, or they, if they did, they were taken by the parties that the owned or ran the business? Or was there something more subtle going on with the FTX fraud, do you think?
It's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure how subtle it was, but um, they were essentially borrowing Peter to pay Paul.
PayPal.
On one level, that's the way to think about it. And, had this incredible valuation of 32 billion. Sam Bankman-Fried, who was the founder and ran it, who's now incarcerated, was hosting Tony Blair and Bill Clinton. He was, and serious people invested in this, with hedge funds and the like, and venture capital funds and the like. It's just incredible. And as John Ray can tell you, and he said this publicly, when he got there, there were there were really no records as such. And so we, with John, the lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell, and the folks at Alex and Partners and Alvarez and Marcel, were responsible for sort of figuring out what happened, what was there, what wasn't there, trying to reconstruct some records. It's an incredible case.
So you've always got to focus on, when you're talking to people, particularly those with the experience that you have, of a case that didn't go the way you wanted it to, and why. Is there one case where you either had to back off because you couldn't get there, or because it fell apart, because somebody, listen, we all make mistakes. If I stop making mistakes, then I stop learning. Is there something that you look back on as one of your lessons learned?
That's a very good question. I don't recall one case that was such a glaring failure that we said, oh, from now we have to do things completely differently, or we'll never do that again. Or
Right.
I do think that, like in anything else, one learns intermittently and gains experience over a period of time. So I think I am much better at what I do than when I first started doing this. I think the firm is, a much more sophisticated place than when I first started it, in large measure because if I have any talent at all, it's because I've hired people that are smarter than me and have different talents than I do. So much of our work is research. I don't know how to research. The most I can do is Google, restaurant reviews or movie reviews, but we have teams of researchers who are incredibly skilled at. Um, but I'm trying to think if there's any case that where we really messed up. I'm sure if I thought about it more, I could figure
Okay, don't
it out.
worry. This is
There's no horror show
no.
that bounces out. But
Did you ever in this part of your career come across a situation we talked about a little bit when you were in the prosecutor's office and they were concerned about your safety because of the corruption in the police force? Is there a particular situation in the work you've done where you or people in your team have felt physically or were threatened in terms of you're getting too close to the Holy Grail here, guys, back off?
no, we've dealt with some nasty people. We've dealt in, very delicate situations. Well, I will say we have done and continue to do a lot of work in Mexico, for instance. And part of that work is in helping clients determine if a business that they're going to invest in or a joint venture partner um, that they're going to enter into an agreement with, or an executive that they're going to hire, if that person or entity is in any way connected to the cartels. And we've been doing that for years. And early on, when we were working for a particular client who we did scores of these investigations for, some of the folks on the ground came across some tough moments, but fortunately, no one was hurt. But if I think about it, um, that's the closest we've come to being at real risk. And fortunately, negotiated uh, our way out and our client's way out of a danger zone. But other than that, I can't think of, and certainly no threats or anything like that
So, we,
yet.
yeah. Well, yes, let's hope you've got many more
I
years,
hope.
which actually is a really interesting question. What's the legacy plan for Dan Nardello, if I may be so cheeky as to ask?
Oh, you can ask, of course. So the plan. This is something I've been thinking about over a good long time over the last 10 years, and the legacy plan is to continue to hire people who are just stellar investigators. And I'm now the chairman of the business. My partner, Sabina Menschel, is the CEO. There are, as I said, six other people with my background and network, including my partner Howard Master, who we hired, a former Southern District assistant, and reputation is really the best investigator in that office of his generation. And over the years, I never really was territorial about any client that I generated for the firm. So the folks in the firm, certainly all the senior folks and my partners, all have worked with our best clients. And so, the capabilities of the team are known. And I think 85% of our business is through existing clients, and a lot of the rest is through referral from those clients. So I started about 10 years thinking about making, the firm, what I like to say, a Danless Nardello. And I think I think we're a long way down that road. I mean, I have a great management team and professional team in place, and frankly, they do most of the heavy lifting in terms of running the business and doing the casework. So I think we're in a good.
And does not getting up and doing what you're doing on a daily basis, the thought of that give you the heebie-jeebies, or have you got your plan of golfing, swimming?
I don't golf. I swim, but I wouldn't make a career of it. Look, I love what nothing that I've said should mean that I have any intention of slowing down. I am invigorated by the business. I love working with my colleagues. I love our clients. We continue to grow. We have a terrific reputation, which I'm very proud of. And I enjoy the stuff I'm doing now, which is essentially dealing with our clients, adding value on cases where my experience is, can add value, but also thinking about the ongoing strategy for developing the business, continuing its growth, recruiting folks. We're planning to open in Paris.
You just answered my next question. I was about to say, so where do you put the flag in next? It's Paris.
I think it's Paris because we've been doing a lot of work there. We have some significant French clients. There are significant French companies. There's a market there, and I think there's an opening in that market for folks who.
So you're firmly in Europe. Have you got an office in Rome?
No.
No. Italy is an interesting place, but that's for another discussion. You've got Europe. You've clearly got America is a place where you are firmly established. Are there any other regions that you are looking at? I mean, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, lots of people have moved.
We've done work for in the Gulf since I started the firm.
Right.
We have an office in Dubai. Our Asia headquarters are in Singapore. We have a great team there. London runs our EMEA practice, and so we do a lot of work in London, in the Mideast, together with the folks in Dubai, and in sub-Saharan Africa. And we see Paris as a hub of a European office, of an EU office, and that's how we think of it. Not narrowly as just a French office, but one that
Right.
will service the rest of Europe.
So before I come to thank you for being so patient and indeed so open, I guess this last question is, look at the young prosecutors coming out of the Southern District or any other district. Would you say to them in this day and age, guys, seek your fortune in the private investigation, corporate advisory area? That is an area that is booming and will look after you well.
Well, that's what I say to the people that we recruit from the Southern District and elsewhere, and I believe it. What I also try to explain to people, and I think you probably understand this, is that this is an enormously fun business. And as somebody who looked at our business, or was interested in our business, told me, the stuff we do has a high cost of failure. And that to me is interesting. As a cop I used to work with, I'd like to say, what kept him going was that every day was a free ticket to a show. And that's exactly how I feel about what I do.
I can't think of a better ending point for our discussion, a free ticket to a show. If you wake up with that mentality and philosophy in whatever you're doing, I think you are quids in and you're going to have a good chance of getting through the day still with a smile on your face. So, Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. I have still got about 82 questions left, but that's maybe for part 2 or part 3. Thank you so much for sharing some of your personal stuff, some of your business stuff, and some of your your thoughts about the industry. I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
And thank you, and look forward to seeing you as well.
Take care. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please click and subscribe to the Intelligence Advantage podcast on Spotify and other platforms.